And we are preparing.
Yeah, this is it's fun though too. Anytime there's a new sport or new contest type or anything like that, it's just an opportunity for the people that get ahead of it, out in front of it first, to make money. Eventually, everyone's going to catch up. Eventually the gap between an expert and a novice shrinks and shrinks and shrinks to the point where the expert doesn't have that much of an edge. But in the beginning of it, anything, the infancy of anything, that's when the best money making opportunities are. And it looks like we're live now, right?
We are live now. And yeah, like one thing I think is important, like with the XFL, especially betting, is understanding that this league's kind of built itself around this idea of parity and, any team could beat any team. But I think more realistically, what's bound to happen with an upstart league that has never had any sense of maturity is that you're really bound to have teams at the very far ends of the outlier spectrum, which is like even more reason why I think Houston and Tampa this week could just be a complete, utter blowout, because it's entirely possible that Houston is just night and day, or maybe them in DC or whoever you want to group them together with are just like heads and tails better than the rest of the league, and that Tampa is heads and tails below. So I just think that was, I like that thought that the variation could be much wider than say we're even accustomed to with the NFL. When we saw point spreads in the NFL this year that were bigger than normal with teams tanking and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and we'll start to welcome everyone to the show. Appreciate everyone joining. This is a fun thing to do, a free show every once in a while, because usually I'm behind the number ball paywall, but Justin invited me to join him for XFL. And while he is very clearly the expert in this show, I figured I could at least hop on and direct the discussion and maybe provide some insight, and certainly selfishly learn something along the way. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of takeaways here. I'm selfishly doing this to figure out who I'm going to play this weekend. So appreciate the invite, Justin. I appreciate you letting me kind of take the wheel here. I know you're used to controlling the show. So how do you feel about me leading the show here?
yeah, I've got my reservations. I've got my doubts on how this is going to flow. I don't know if you're ready for that level of responsibility, Jeff. It's quite a load to handle. It's quite a burden, quite a weight on your shoulders. And I don't know if you've been doing your squats in the gym, if you can handle that type of pressure.
Certainly have not been doing squats. I don't know if you can tell, but I think that this is going to be fun. It's of course we'll talk about the DFS implications, everything, the best plays on the slate from a salary perspective, from a matchup perspective, all that kind of stuff. Maybe discuss just some general ideas too of who we think is going to win, who's kind of the teams you'd want to bet on, maybe we were getting into it right as we were pushing the show live about how efficient these lines even are. Right? We saw that the XFL totals especially moved just, I don't know, would they move 7-9 points or something on those totals that they opened super but more accurate actually, since everything started going under. But everyone thought that these games were going to go over those initial totals. So first, let's start with just your thinking there. What has led to these games being lower scoring than the market has been projecting for?
Yeah, I think some of that was a little bit predictable, honestly, as you're thinking about all the rule changes. I know everybody was super excited, double forward passes and 3-point conversions. And I was really super excited about some of the special teams. I thought we'd see kickoffs taken to the house. I thought we'd see punt returns taken to the house. I thought that gunners not being able to leave the line of scrimmage until after the ball was actually punted, I thought that just meant huge head of steam for these returners. And that's not really been the case. So it's funny. A lot of the more conventional ways that you thought they might get there with in terms of extra points just hadn't been there. And, another sort of prediction I had that fell face flat was the idea that the run games could be super efficient. I thought that as far as the offensive line play goes, it seemed to me like run blocking would actually transfer better than pass blocking, but we've actually seen, reasonable pass protection. We've seen quarterbacks with time, and there's a number of mobile quarterbacks in the league who've managed to stay up in the pocket and get out, scramble, make plays, even extend plays in the pocket. But it's been sort of that establishing that flow on the offensive side in the run game just hasn't really been there. The league's averaging right at 4.0 yards per carry. So it's going to put them below league average for the NFL as sort of an example. So, I did think that there was an opportunity these things could just be super sloppy earlier. And it's only been 2 weeks, but, we've seen teams just not exactly able to convert. It's funny, like how many times teams have gotten the ball to the red zone and like turnovers in the red zone, just weird, stupid stuff that happens in the first couple games of the year, things that tend to get ironed out with preseason games and things like that we get used to that, XFL had like just a sort of off-season scrimmages in Houston at one point this year, but not actually like full-blown preseason scrimmages. So still banging off the rust. I think that's responsible for some of it, but I think a lot of it was just overhyped pace. Like everybody thought these games were going to be like super, super fast and like 100 plays per offense. And it just turns out that's not really the case, but I think that could have been seen coming. So the under was always going to be the play, I think, but it's probably a little bit more exaggerated than even I thought it would be.
Yeah, and so as we're opening up the show and pre-show and everything, talking about how the biggest edge is going to be for the people that can, of course, figure things out the quickest. And that translates also to the actual game itself, where these coaches and these minds behind the teams and the strategizing and everything, they're still trying to figure out how do we even optimally play within the rules. How do we take advantage of these different things, these different limitations that the defense has or the special teams has or whatever. Everyone's still trying to figure this out. And not gonna like insult the general intelligence of the XFL minds or something, but you've got I don't know how many people playing this from a fantasy perspective of very clearly very sharp people trying to figure this out. It might be that DFS XFL gets kind of figured out before the actual game itself gets figured out, which is pretty strange and unique and weird to me.
Yeah, I could not honestly believe how close the games came to optimal last week. The winner of the big GPP on DraftKings missed optimal by just 4 points. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I think that gets tougher this week as pricing shrinks everybody down. You actually have to make real decisions. You can't just play the 7 best players and throw them in a lineup all willy-nilly. Like, you've actually got to be pretty strategic in that regard. So really interested to see, like, once pricing and value become key parts of how you assemble a lineup, like, it doesn't necessarily matter that you got like the top scorers all fit nicely into the actual 50K salary cap. Worked out fine. You didn't have to sacrifice at all. Once that no longer becomes the case, then we've got some real like game theory elements that we can chop up.
All right, so we're gonna go game by game, and mainly going to let Justin unleash all of this research that he's done. If you're not following him on Twitter and just seeing all the free stuff that he's putting out there, and you're playing XFL DFS, I mean, you're obviously sacrificing an opportunity to learn something and to digest some information. It's very hard to find out there. It's not like we have a ton of sites that are putting out good information. You can follow Justin on Twitter at Justin Freeman 18. I'm at Jeff K. Collins. And while he is posting really cool stuff like your usage adjusted depth chart is one of the best things you put out, I think. Really cool, unique tool that people can use to get an idea of which guys are getting opportunities. He puts that kind of stuff out there on Twitter, and then of course posts stuff to the website numberball.com, and all the content is completely free. And projections that we're usually, other sports we're charging $200 for the season, we're charging $9.99 for your projections, and it's the same format, the same structure, the same skeleton, I guess you say, as the NFL projections that we use. It's just with XFL players and a few adjustments, right? So really good opportunity to become educated with good information for real cheap with the free with the content, real cheap with the projections. Yeah, so let's start off with this first game, which I know you already have just a strong opinion about because you hit up our Slack and you said you guys need to bet on Houston. The line is to a small here. They're two small favorites here. They're the best team in the league playing maybe the worst team in the league. I believe it opened up as 5.5 point favorites on the road, right? It's now at 6.5. It hasn't moved that much, but Houston is looking good, right? Really good quarterback play for them. I think really stands out with Philip Walker, but just overall, generally, a team that looks really good. Why don't you talk to people about that, about why they are much better than Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I think Tampa Bay actually showed some signs of encouragement when Aaron Murray was under center. Like I know he was, not exactly, the most secure guy with the ball in his hands, but he at least moved the ball down the field quite a bit. And the run game for this team doesn't look horrible. So there's some signs for encouragement. As mentioned to you pre-show, like a lot of the analytics guys who are studying some of the more football advanced metrics related to the XFL actually show Tampa as being relatively in the mix as far as EPA per play, offensively and defensively. They've shown some semblance of a run game. They've got a couple guys there that are Devion Smith, Jacques Patrick. They're capable of carrying some load. And we can talk a little bit about that backfield and how I think it's going to shake out. I think there's a little bit of a changing of the guard there, or at least a committee forming. But I think there's some opportunity on the Tampa side to maybe take advantage of some guys, especially like if we think this is going to be a high scoring environment. And so, part of what we get a chance to do, like, when we're doing our NFL projections, we get to rely on like a super, super efficient Vegas market to help determine, what we can expect as far as scoring outcomes for each team. With the XFL, like we've got a market, but I would, be reticent to call it efficient in any sort of way. You can still very much make your own claims as to how you think these games are going to go. And I really have a hard time seeing this being anything other than super one-sided. So, while, Vegas, or Antigua, as I like to call it, has Houston favored by 5.5 to 6 or 6.5, depending on what time you saw it during the week. Like, I think there's a really good chance they win by 3 touchdowns. Like, I think that's almost like that. I expected the line to be well within the double digits on this one. So if Houston's going to win in a blowout, then that means that we can expect a big game from Philip Walker. And so despite the fact he is the most expensive quarterback on the board at DraftKings, he's still going to come in as the highest projected guy. And that's with, baking in not a huge implied team total. And I think he's going to blow that implied team total out of the water. So he's going to have as much upside as any player on the slate. So really, really interested in him. And then you got to get a little bit creative with some of the guys you're going to pair him with. Obviously, heading into the season, Sammy Coates was the guy like everybody just couldn't wait to play. He had a little bit of like NFL name brand still tied with him. And now he's just like the absolute worst guy as far as converting into, converting targets into catches. Just a horrible catch rate, and one of the least efficient receivers in the game, despite having great quarterback play. So, but it's been Cam Phillips, a guy from Virginia Tech, who's come in and looked great, had 3 touchdowns last week. He's obviously going to be super popular. Popped up on the injury report at one point this week, and I think that's just sort of a precautionary type of thing. So I wouldn't put too much stock into that. But there's going to be a number of other ways to get a part of this offense. The running back James Butler is a guy who you could play if you were looking to mix things up a little bit, but not going to be a super big consideration for me. I'm going to be focusing on Khalil Lewis. I'm going to be focusing on Nick Holley, and then of course, looking at Cam Phillips as sort of the primary guy there, but obviously going to draw a lot of attention. So I mentioned a little bit about how pricing is going to be a bit of a factor this week, and You may have to make some sacrificial decisions. You can't just play best dude across the board at every position. So you may not be able to get up to Cam Phillips this week, or you may not want to, just in the name of differentiation. Like I think we can start to implement, whereas I think the first couple of weeks you want to play it super straight and just jam in as many optimal points as you can. We're getting a little bit to a transition where I think you can start thinking about contrarian mindset and how to take down GPPs.
Yeah, along those lines, as most of what I take when I am approaching a new sport like this is just trying to figure out how to best use game theory and strategy and that sort of thing. And I just rely on your stuff, like your content, your projections. I don't feel like I need to do my own or something. Let me just spend my time trying to figure out how do I get contrarian? What are the moves to make right now? And I'm curious what you think about this, but my initial thinking here is, even though with a team like that you think is really good, like Houston or whatever, and you think that, well, this team is just so much better than this other team who sucks. In a 2-game sample size, don't you think that it's quite a bit safer than pretty much anything we've ever dealt with in DFS to almost just throw that out the window and say, you know what, let's just play it as if if everyone likes whatever team, if Houston's going to be popular, let's play Tampa Bay or whatever. For me, that I would strongly lean towards that, but it obviously still sounds like you love Houston. I'm not going to give away too much from your projections since they're already so cheap anyway. People just need to pay for them. But it seems like Tampa Bay is actually grading out really well in your projections, which encouraged me with that approach as well.
Yeah, and I think so obviously when we're talking about how to attack a 4-game slate, that's different than even say a full 16-game NFL slate or a 13-game or whatever. We really need to focus around specific games. So you could still focus on this game and just sort of load up on sort of the more Tampa Bay side of the equation, or you can just know that this Houston side is going to attract a lot of attention and divert elsewhere. We'll talk about Seattle a little bit later. And we talked a little bit about already being able to take guys who are priced down quite a bit. And so just to sort of sneak ahead, let me just do a point of comparison. PJ Walker, 11.5 on DraftKings this week. And Brandon Silvers, the quarterback of Seattle, only 7.5 this week. So $4,000 difference. Now, if this were NFL and we're talking about a $4,000 gap between two viable quarterbacks, we're jumping on that value all day. Like, we're going to love that. And Brandon Silvers threw 3 touchdowns in week 1. So what if Brandon Silvers isn't garbage? So that to me is like a way to take this pivot notion that we want to do, which is to maybe just avoid, the chalky option on a pair of teams that we think we've got figured out that maybe we don't, but let's just maybe go slightly somewhere else without just having to flip the whole thing on its head.
Yeah, totally. So one trend I've noticed in betting is that Houston's the only team that's gone over both times, right? We're talking about a lot of unders, and I told you that's kind of what I'm investing a good chunk of money in, is betting the unders in these games. So what do you attribute that to? Do you attribute that to a pace, or do you have any sort of opinion on that? Is this going to be a good situation for Tampa Bay just as much as Houston, basically, is what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I think Tampa Bay can ride the coattails of the game script and get a bunch of guys to relative performance there. Another thing to keep in mind on the Tampa Bay side, it looks like they will not have Nick Truesdale, who's like their big tight end wide receiver hybrid type guy. And so that's going to open up probably like 13 to 15% of team targets for somebody else. And, Dan Williams was a guy who popped on the scene week 1 with over 100 yards and looks like pretty easily the best receiver on that group. I mistakenly went to Jalen Tolliver last week, hoping he would be my savior, but that was not to be. And he just looks like maybe he's not going to be quite the most efficient guy, but keep an eye on SJ Green. He is I don't know whether he'll even be active this week or not. He actually was signed by Seattle from the Canadian League and then traded from Seattle to Tampa this week. So whether he plays or not remains to be seen. But as far as talent goes, like, he's got professional experience. He should slide right into a starting role sooner rather than later. The only question is like whether he actually plays. And I know that's kind of a big if, but if he doesn't play, a guy that we're super interested in. But if you just don't want to, like, don't overthink things too much, just go to Dan Williams. He's a guy I got projected for over 70 yards right now. So that's going to be among the tops. If not, let me do a quick the tops. I've got him projected for the most receiving yards in the league this week. So definitely a guy who can, like I said, ride the coattails of a negative game script into some fantasy stardom and attract a lot of targets.
Yeah, you don't have to have any shame about recommending a guy that might not play. I did that yesterday in NBA, where I said, look, I don't even know this guy. If he plays 0 minutes, I'm not going to be surprised. And like, that's an NBA on like a pretty big slate. It was like an 8-game slate or something. We're talking about XFL on a 4-game slate or 2-game slate if you play on FanDuel, right? I mean, it's just
the reporting is it drives me so insane, like just how loosey goosey all the reporting. Even like the league issued injury reports are just pure garbage. Everything's just I'm tilting pretty hard right now.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, let's spend a little more time on this game, talking about specific players that we're high on here. And I mean, full disclosure, I am probably going to mention someone that's not even playing or something. Like, Justin is the expert. Let me stress that. You can rely on me for strategy and game theory and everything, but this guy is grinding out XFL every day when I'm grinding out NBA. So yeah, it would seem obvious that Walker is going to be a target, right? I don't think we need to spend much time there. You mentioned like I don't know what the number 4, number 5 wide receiver from Tampa. Do you like the guys above him or no?
Well, yeah, like, so I think the thing is, like, if he play, you'll get word probably whether he's dressing and suited up and stuff like that. If he plays, consider him in a GPP, but like, don't feel like you got to go crazy. I'm just saying there's some opportunity that has just recently emerged on the table there. I actually like the running backs from Tampa better than anything. Is Jacques Patrick is the guy who I like the best. He and Davion Smith appeared to, they're really emerging into a backfield. Tampa is second best rushing team in the league right now. They're averaging 5 yards a carry, looking really good. And those two guys are exclusive. They're the only 2 running backs on roster, unless you count Quentin Flowers, who's sort of a quarterback running back hybrid type. It's them. So we always like when we can sort of take that opportunity tree and whittle it down quite a bit. So we're down to 2 guys. We don't have to worry about other guys siphoning off carries and targets. And, I've got Patrick projected for a pair of targets as well. So given his price tag's only $4,400 as compared to Davion Smith $6,300, it's almost $2K cheaper that you can get up to perhaps the quarterback that you want to play or something like that. So I think they're very similar in how they're going to be used, and you can take advantage of that. Nick Holley is going to grade out as sort of the best value play at receiver there for the Houston offense. So if you're looking for some maybe unconventional ways to pair Phillip Walker with some of these guys, Nick Holley may be your guy. Like, everybody's having a funeral service for Nick Holley's running back eligibility. In fantasy, we always love when guys are sort of mislabeled with their eligibilities, and we can take advantage of that. Holley was lined up as a running back in camp, I guess, and was categorized as such, but he's played receiver both games, like full-fledged slot receiver. And Houston's running 4 wide. So he's on the field all the time, runs a ton of routes, and gets targeted. Not usually super deep down the field, but if you're looking for guys who can, possibly be the beneficiaries of Cam Phillips not getting the touchdowns, it could be Nick Holley. Like, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to expect given his target volume and his role in the offense. So for me, like, I like attacking this, and this doesn't match the game script as much, but keep in mind, an XFL game script doesn't mean as much as NFL. That's going to be a really key thing to remember. Like, if Houston has a 20-point lead heading into the 4th quarter, well, they're not going to just run the ball. It makes no difference whether they run it or pass it. The clock's going to keep going at that point. And the same thing really true for Tampa. Like, if they're down 20, now granted that they want to move the ball quicker, they'll probably resort to throwing, but probably more apt for the teams trying to run the 4-minute drill offensively at the end of halves. Like there's no advantage to just pounding the rock. The clock keeps going no matter what until that 2-minute warning. So definitely think that those Tampa Bay running backs are still in consideration as very effective players, and possibly they get a couple extra checkdowns as a result of that. But Roughnecks defense, another thing I want to talk about. They are the most expensive D on the slate at 5,200, and they're in consideration. They're among the league leaders, or they are the league leader in generating pressure. So that's something we definitely want to take into consideration, that they're going to be wreaking havoc in the backfield. So that always generates defensive fantasy points. And it's going to be Dan Williams as the guy I'm really interested in playing on the pass catching group out of Tampa.
Cool. All right. Yeah, we should probably move on to some other games. So we spent a lot of time on this game. Apparently my dog wants everyone to meet her. This is Millie here. If you're hearing any background noise, it's because I was stupid and I thought she was going to be good and I wouldn't have to put her away. But yeah, now she's hopping up on my lap, which she never does. Anyway, so final thoughts on this and just in general with game theory. I'm sure people are curious if you think that it makes sense to stack wide receivers and quarterbacks as the same correlations that we're dealing with in NFL, right?
Absolutely, and probably more of it, honestly. So on the shorter slate, I think you're going to want to be like super heavy on what you think the one game that could shoot out is. And this is very possibly that one game. So definitely load up on the Houston side. I would not be afraid to throw 4 Houston players out there and run it back with 1 Tampa player. I think that'd be a perfectly fine way to play it.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the next game. We've got Dallas and Seattle. Dallas, another one of the teams that's looked pretty good. Of course, they're 4-point road favorites here in Seattle. Yeah, why don't you just kind of give an overview of this game, how you expect it to go? It is all these games, the totals are pretty similar, so I don't know like how much to really pull from the 40 total and the 45 total, whatever, on a 4-game slate. Yeah. But just your general thought of whether this is a good game to attack or not.
Yeah, so heading into the Dallas LA game last week, it's kind of a letdown. The XFL had been kind of boring, and 3/4 of this game went by and it was boring, and people were like, where's the scoring? And then the 4th quarter of this game happened and Landry Jones showed up, went for right around 300 yards passing and hit a touchdown. Cameron Artis-Payne, a couple more touchdowns, and the game really lit up. Josh Johnson from the other side found some touchdowns. So I'm wondering whether we saw the beginning of sort of this new Dallas offense that we had kind of hoped to see beforehand. Like they obviously had the name brand coaching staff with Bob Stoops and Hal Mumme. Like everybody thought they were just going to throw the ball all over creation. And now they kind of are. Like the second half of that game was pretty encouraging. So I definitely want some pieces of that Dallas passing game. Obviously Cameron Artis-Payne was the guy who had the slate breaking performance last week. If that's going to inflate his ownership, just give me 0 Cameron Artis-Payne. Like I know he's NFL caliber talent and everything, but even his usage last week, not that encouraging. Like you can't project that type of output on the type of work that he saw. And he splits duties with Lance Dunbar. In fact, Lance Dunbar may have the more important role as far as fantasy production goes in that offense and the way he gets there. So would not surprise me if Lance Dunbar outscores Cameron Artis-Payne. So yeah, I'm really interested in getting pieces of Donald Parham. I'm interested in getting pieces of Jeff Badet. I'm interested in getting pieces of Flynn Nagel. Those are the primary pass catchers. Man, Parham, he's like the love of my life. He's fantastic. He's 6'8", tight end, and he's lean, and he looks like a wide receiver, and he's fluid, and he moves well. I have dreams about Donald Parham laying down in bed at night. He's just a beast. And he was on my Redskins, Jeff. Did you know this? He used to be a Washington Redskin for like 3 weeks. And, I guess you got to keep guys like Hale Hentges and Jeremy Sprinkle instead of him. It's really just kind of upsetting me.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. What a bummer. I would be thinking about that all night as well. Yeah, Lance Dunbar has looked pretty good out there. It's funny seeing these kind of NFL cast-offs that you think, oh, that guy's not any good. And then, of course, in NFL and different competition level, you're like, wow, this guy's amazing. So that's probably what you're doing with the guy you're dreaming of. But yeah, Lance Dunbar's been really involved in the pass game. Has been targeted 6 times in each of these games here. Is that been a product of game script or anything that you wouldn't think would project for this game? Or do you think he's still good for 6 targets, good for some involvement in the rushing game, and maybe gets in for a score?
Yeah, his usage has not been game flow dependent at all. It's really just how they want to use him in this offense. It's it looks like it's something that's going to be pretty sticky and pretty straightforward moving forward. So they like to throw to their running backs, which is an encouraging sign. And that, I know like Air Raid has this like vertical mindset as far as the perception goes, but Air Raid really is all about taking the shortest things first and then forcing people to sort of shorten the field. And then that's when the second level opens up. It's their equivalent of establishing the run, right? Like that's how they do it is via short passing game. They treat that as an extension of the run game. So that involves guys like Lance Dunbar. And then, my dude, Donald Parham, he's obviously capable of doing both. He's been involved in the middle of the field and lining up wide. He lines up out in the flank and runs deep sideline routes as well. So just total stud, total beast guy I'm interested in playing. Nagel, a bit more of a possession receiver type, but maybe not quite getting as many targets as we'd hope to see from a possession receiver. And then Jeff Badet has been, he was sort of the speed threat. Like he's a sub 440 guy and just has had one of the lowest ADOTs in the league. It's kind of weird. You kind of hope they find a way to get him loose. So if you're looking for a dark horse type guy who can just maybe, break it open like Keenan Reynolds did last week on his, 67-yard bomb, I think it was. It could be Jeff Badet this week. He's certainly somebody I'd be interested in. I think this Dallas offense is going to be significantly different, but I'd still rather see another week of like super solid performance from Landry Jones before I fire him up. I just don't know at this point if he has that pure raw ceiling to get there and separate himself from the field the way that some of these other guys do. A guy like Phillip Walker who can get there in a multitude of different ways and has shown proclivity in a high scoring offense. That's more my style. Or even a guy like Josh Johnson, who I can get at a discount and has multiple ways of scoring as well. I like athletic quarterbacks. They do well in my models. The rushing yardage really adds up and it's bankable. And you're really just hoping Landry Jones throws for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns to get there.
Yeah, you're not saying Landry Jones is mobile and athletic, right?
No, I'm saying if you saw Landry Jones try to slide last week.
I did.
I think I could have pulled off that barrel roll. In fact, I have in times before.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. And he looked bad in general, especially that first half, I think it was. But of course, it came around for him at the end there, ended up throwing for over 300 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. We'll see. That was his first game. Not going to make any bold declarations about how he projects moving forward. So yeah, I'm glad you said Badet too and pronounced it that way, because I would have called him Bidet maybe, and that's in the bathroom. That's something here, but it's not a wide receiver in the NFL, right?
Well, do you have takes on Bidet life? I mean, I imagine you've got one there in your abode.
Got one, yeah. Use it? No. Just kind of came with the house. You don't say, hey, can you remove this bidet? I don't really use this, but yeah. Talk to me about enough about bidets. Let's talk about Austin Prohl. That first week he looked good against DC, and then last week 4 targets, 1 catch, 1 fantasy point. And I'd imagine people, with him being one of the more expensive wide receivers, 8,400, are going to bail on him, right? Like people aren't going to play him this week, are they?
I hope not. I mean, he's a pretty objectively terrible play this week. And he was a bad play last week too. And hopefully if everybody was reading or listening last week, they stayed away from Austin Prohl and got on Keenan Reynolds, who is a guy who we're super excited about. And there's just going to be more reason to be on Keenan Reynolds moving forward in the future, regardless. Although, I mean, he has if it weren't for Sammy Coates, he'd probably have the worst catch rate in the league. It's getting a little bit ridiculous, like how inefficient a target to Keenan Reynolds is, but you saw exactly why they keep going to him last week. He just took the lid off and kept on running and put 6 on the board. So the Dallas defense has been reasonable through 2 games. It'll be interesting to see. They obviously kept Jordan Ta'amu pretty bottled up there in the first week, and then Josh Johnson had a tough time establishing rhythm last week against Dallas. So we'll see whether there's anything to the Dallas defense or not. But Brandon Silvers is a guy on the Seattle side that I think is interesting. Really, not for any other reason other than like he's $7,500, and if salary matters on the slate, now I'm not saying it's going to, but it could, and it probably will, then getting to a couple guys like Brandon Silvers could be really interesting. I think you have to think about how does the quarterback position shake out at large. There's really 8 guys in consideration. And what are the odds that there's like a true difference maker, the true guy who stands out? Through 2 weeks, there's been a single guy in each of those weeks. It's Jordan Ta'amu last week and Philip Walker the week before. If that pattern holds, then you're going to want whoever that guy is, and it's probably not Brandon Silvers. But in the case that just like heading into the 4th game last week, everybody's hovering right around 20 points, then yeah, you're going to want Brandon Silvers at 20 as opposed to Philip Walker at 20, because you're going to have 4,000 extra bucks in your pocket to boost the rest of your lineup. So I think he's in consideration for that reason.
All right. Tell me this. What is the likelihood that Artis Payne and Dunbar, using them in the same lineup, they both pay off and have enough upside for their price this week?
Almost none. I just think playing a 2 running back combination is going to be minus EV. I think maybe if you're doing it, and this would be maybe a Jeff Collins question here, even though both weeks so far, you're just wanting the 1 running back, because that's only as many as you have to play on DraftKings, right? You can play 1 running back, 4 receivers. And that so far has been the optimal way to play it. That doesn't mean it'll always be the optimal way to play it. So do we consider playing 2 running backs in this type of situation? Does that make sense from a game theory perspective?
Well, that's kind of the angle I was going for there. I know that is going to be extremely unique. And I think that that's the biggest battle that you have on your hands when you're dealing with 4-game XFL slates right now, is just getting unique lineups. But I'm skeptical that in this situation it would work out. It worked out last week, but their prices went up, right, to the point where it's very unlikely that it ends up working this week. It's just that there are so many busts in XFL, at least just from my perspective anyway. It seems like there are a lot of busts that if you can correlate a team that you think is going to score a lot of points, or just take a chance that the team's going to score a lot of points, and that's going to balance out your whole lineup, then I don't mind that approach at all. With stacking, I think my approach would be to go extreme in tournaments. So I've only messed around a little bit with the XFL DFS so far, kind of dipped my toe into the water. I've been playing single lineups, FanDuel and DraftKings, but considering, you and I have talked about this, potentially going with the MM this week and locking in some crazy rules in there, maybe building out 10 lineups that have 2 running backs from the same team, because I know that I'm probably going to be the only one with those lineups.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to try to get creative. Having 2 running backs in your lineup, period. I still trying to get a feel of how much, bad action is still in these tournaments. Because who else is playing multiple running backs are bad players. So
yeah,
you gotta beat those guys. So do you want to intentionally be bad? And it kind of gets back to some of the things we talked about with Showdown in the past too. When there's only so many freaking ways to put it together, sometimes you just make a bad lineup and hope that it's at least unique enough that you can launch to the top of the leaderboard with just getting one thing right, albeit an unlikely thing to happen. And just creating leverage for yourself. So yeah, I think anybody who out there who's just not MMEing, basically, I would say don't play a 2 running back lineup.
Yeah, I think that to expand on that, when you say, do you make a bad play like that? More often than not, I will make a bad play, a worse play when it's correlated. Because that's what correlation with stacking and stuff, you are playing suboptimal plays. It'll very rarely project that a stack is gonna be better than if you aren't stacking. So anytime you stack, you're basically playing worse plays than you could be playing. But in general, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily play two running backs from different teams. Just two running backs from the same team, hoping that maybe since there's only 4 games, you get the one team that puts up 35 points or something, and these other 40 points, more than that, who knows? And all these other teams, or most of these other teams, bust, and or maybe you get some random touchdowns from some guys, stuff like that. So I'm kind of one of the weird guys that actually doesn't mind making bad plays as long as they're correlated, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Which two running backs, same team, probably not correlated.
It could be if your angle is a full team stack. I would argue anyway, because your strict angle is touchdowns, points, that kind of stuff, and there will theoretically will be enough opportunity to pay off if the pricing is right, like last week for these guys rather than this week. But yeah, it's an interesting debate, and it's one that's certainly not solved with like a definite answer for well, this is definitely correct and definitely positive expected value or anything like that. But it's stuff that I wouldn't mind experimenting with a little bit, I'd say. Anything else in this game that we should highlight before we move on here? Somehow we've spent 20 minutes on each game so far.
We're going deep here at Number Ball here on the live stream. Dragons D is a defense that I'm interested in. They're probably my favorite D, despite the fact they're going up against a sort of resurgent offense, possibly. Landry Jones, this is sort of my fun fact I just like to drop as often as possible. Other than Jalen McClendon, he is the highest XFL quarterback in terms of college interception rate. So my boy likes to toss the ball to the other team. And Seattle had a great performance last week defensively, scored 23. So yeah, sign me up for Dragons D. They're, I think, 3,300 this week in my best value.
Yeah, that they grade out really well in your projection. So nice call there. Good job pointing that out. Sometimes defenses get ignored, and not by Justin though, not today. All right, let's talk about the New York Guardians at the St. Louis Battlehawks. The Battlehawks are massive 10-point favorites here, and this is probably the second best team in the league. I guess you could most would probably say here. It's just that it sounds like you're not super concerned about game flow type stuff. I have seen some people concerned about the setup of if a team gets a big lead and how that kind of slows down the game and stuff. But I mean, you make really good points about the end of the game and when the clock starts and everything. It's really tough to try and figure out, okay, is this game over? Or is it almost over? Or how many knees would they have to take? It's still getting used to all of that stuff. But what is your interest level in one of these big favorites playing in the biggest spread?
Well, I think trying to figure out what to do with Jordan Thomas is really interesting because he was kind of a forgotten man last week. I definitely wasn't on him, and hurt me for sure as the guy who sort of broke the slate at the quarterback position. Definitely as a guy you can consider playing. It's tough to figure out like what this New York team's going to look like and whether it stays competitive or not. But yeah, like you sort of alluded to there, it may not matter. Like Tamu was captain check down last week, and he just like peppered LaDainian Washington and peppered Alonzo Russell, DeMornay Pearson-L. There's sort of the 3-wide set there for St. Louis, and just hammered them with target after target after target, all behind the line of scrimmage. Lowest ADOT quarterback in the league last week. So, yeah, I think that's a recipe for success for these guys until it's taken away. So, I think if you're chasing PPR type receivers, any of those guys are definitely guys who are in consideration. Would want to mix those guys in. I don't like the general environment for Tamu as much. We've seen New York play decent defense in the past. They played well in week 1 against Tampa and then got kind of beat up pretty bad against DC last week. But I think New York is capable of playing reasonable defense. But I honestly don't have a very good feel for how this game's going to go. Obviously, Vegas and Antigua see it going pretty one-sided. So, I'm just kind of this is not going to be the spot that I attack other than probably, we talked about building up around core game stacks. And so like if I'm going with a 3+1 from one game, I'm probably wanting to bring it back with one St. Louis player or don't forget about Mikhail McKay for New York, who is still sort of an air yards god and goes out and gets it done that way. So he's a guy. If you just try to get creative, possibly with some of these one-offs, I think that's a spot. Like obviously Cameron Payne was the one-off last week that you needed to succeed. So just try to maybe get creative here. I think is a good way to attack this game.
Yeah. St. Louis is one of the only two teams that has covered both times. So it's a team that's been, good in that sense. They're outperforming expectations. Tiamu, we talked about him a little bit in Slack, right? He's okay. He's certainly more athletic than Landry Jones, I would say.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just such a small sample size. I have such a hard time like saying, yeah, that guy's good. It's like, he's okay. He's been okay. But I know that you've been pretty high on guys like, I think your projections last week, correct me if I'm wrong, were pretty high on guys like Matt Jones and LaDainian Washington. And it looked like Pearson L really emerged last week. He looked incredible to me. Looks like a smaller guy, but has some speed and maybe some run after the catch ability and everything. So anything there that strikes as something that you want to talk about and let people know something about?
Well, I think keeping an eye on LaDainian, and I don't know if you could check out the injury report, Jeff, while I talk on XFL's website or not, but LaDainian Washington heading into tonight was actually downgraded. He was downgraded. He was limited, I believe, on Wednesday, and then on Thursday he was downgraded to did not practice, which is always concerning anytime you see midweek injuries get worse. So if LaDainian Washington doesn't play, then that's going to mean just even more work for Pearson L. I think Pearson L is sort of more the one-to-one corollary there with Washington. And then obviously it's going to be somebody else behind those guys, maybe Keith Mumphrey, who steps up or maybe it could be really anybody else. It could be tight end Marcus Lucas. It could be whoever step up and take over some of that opportunity. But it would be obviously Alonzo Russell and Pearson L, who would be the two lead dogs who would probably see an augmented role in the offense, would be really interested in either of those guys.
Yeah, on the XFL's website, the injury report, don't know how accurate this is, but like you said, reporting is pretty limited anyway. It does have LaDainian Washington is questionable along with Matt Jones. Matt Jones had a knee issue and LaDainian Washington at ankle. Matt Jones, though, practiced in full, it looked like, and LaDainian Washington was limited. So probably be more concerned about Washington, especially like you said, with the downgrade.
Yeah, so if he's back to limited, maybe that's a sign pointing back in the right direction. Maybe just sort of a one-day blip of the radar there. So I don't mind any of the three receivers there for St. Louis. I have Washington graded out as the best value currently.
Cool. Anything else here we should talk about? Do you like the St. Louis defense in a situation like this, as we're talking about the similarities between NFL DFS and XFL DFS? I think it's pretty common. People look at these big spreads and want to take the defenses, especially if it's a home team, right? And so here you've got the Battlehawks as a big home favorite. I think an NFL DFS player is naturally going to go, oh yeah, that would make sense, game script wise and everything, lead to more sacks, potentially more turnovers, all that kind of stuff. Is St. Louis the chalk defense this week?
Yeah, I think probably so. They're only 3,700, so that's 1,500 cheaper than the Roughnecks. So that puts them in prime opportunity. What's that? The fourth most expensive defense on the week. So right smack in the middle, honestly, and they have the lowest implied total. So sometimes it's best just not to overthink it too much. They're playing against a really terrible quarterback and a team that has struggled to move the football very well. So yeah, maybe just don't overthink it. Play St. Louis D.
Really terrible quarterback. Hope his family isn't watching, but I appreciate the really strong takes here.
My apologies to the McGloin family.
Do you think Marquise Williams should be starting or what?
Oh, absolutely. Marquise Williams actually broke my heart at Duke quite a few times. He's the UNC guy. So he's he's a guy who seems to fit in the mold of quarterback that does really well. Like he's proficient in the pocket and capable to extend. I think that's really the type of guy you're looking for in today's professional football leagues. Has that skill set. So yeah, I think he fits much better and gives the Guardians a much better chance to win.
Cool. All right. So that's it from this one, right? You want to move on?
Yeah, let's go quick, baby.
Okay, let's talk about DC and LA. DC, I want to say, what is their record right now? They're 2-0, right?
2-0. Yeah, you called St. Louis the second best team in the league, but my DC Defenders would beg to differ with that.
Oh man, well, I guess St. Louis, from a betting perspective, has been. Of course, St. Louis lost a game, but covered both games. DC, I mentioned that they were one of two teams. DC is the other team that covered both games that they played in. Difference is they won both of them. So, all right, fine. DC, maybe the second best team here. You've got them as 8.5-point road favorites, which is a bigger deal than being, barely, maybe 10-point home favorites like St. Louis is. So what do you think of their competition going up against LA, which is pretty close to me? This, I guess, would be my home team if I had to pick one.
Oh, this is our rivalry game right here, Jeff. Like, I think we got to throw the kitchen sink on this game. I'll give you even money right here. I'll take my Defenders and you take your Wildcats. That seems
very, very kind of you, Justin. But I think I'm going to pass on that one.
But yeah, total revenge game narrative here. Rashad Ross, former LA Wildcat, traded to my DC Defenders in exchange for Trey McBride, who did not play. Kind of like SJ Green heading into this week. That was Trey McBride last week. A guy who we thought could have a role if he played and just seemed to stay on the sideline. So proceed with caution there. But yeah, so Rashad Ross, I don't know if he was like a locker room problem, didn't get along with the coaching staff, whatever. Anyway, things are crazy in LA, but they traded him and he may be one of the best receivers in the XFL. And he got traded, I guess, for conflict or something. I don't know, but he's been good and he's been efficient and he's done well. He's not really gotten as many targets as many would expect. He's been kind of running as like a number 3 in the DC offense, but it's a super potent offense and they've been doing really well. The return of DeAndre Tompkins last week was big, and Tompkins was everywhere last week. And he's easily the best play on the slate this week. DeAndre Tompkins, go ahead and book that. 5,700, severely underpriced, just stands out in a really big way as far as, production for price goes. So if you are, creating lineups, like, to me, and he'll be highly owned, I'm sure. If people have any semblance of clue, like Tompkins should be like 100% owned and he'll probably be 35% owned or something. So just keep that in mind. Maybe a guy to fade in some of your multi-entry stuff, but definitely a guy who should be the first guy you click in for cash games and things like that. So yeah, I'm interested in Tompkins and definitely want to look at ways I can get him in the game. The quarterbacks in this game are super interesting. They're two guys that I'm really kind of waffling and going back and forth on, and have, pretty similar projections on. I have really similar projections on like 4 different dudes this week. Cardell Jones, Philip Walker, Jordan Ta'amu, and Josh Johnson. So Josh Johnson is the LA quarterback. He came in and played his first game last week and got into the high teens as far as fantasy points goes. A little slow starting, just kind of misconnected a couple of times. But what I did love to see was, especially in the fourth quarter, they pushed the ball deep down the field and they were close to connecting a couple of times. And so I like seeing those intended air yards, and just that's a key way that we use in NFL to identify big play potential. And I think that's all over the place here in LA. Adonis Jennings is a guy who was just like always the go get it deep ball guy for Josh Johnson, and they just missed every time. And there's probably, they may not be that good. That may just be the reason they missed, but you could also chalk it up maybe to just first time out. I think you'll see a more polished Josh Johnson this week. So he's actually a guy I'm really, really considering making a key focal point in my MME run for sure. Cardale Jones is a guy who hasn't really like exploded yet, but he's almost certainly the most talented quarterback in the league. Like if you just stand back and look at how easy he kind of makes it look, he doesn't get rattled. He's got, as Booger would say, just tons of poise in the pocket. Just big poise guy there, Cardale Jones. So yeah, I like the way he looks, but he doesn't. We're talking about Brandon Silvers could be in that muddle of guys with 20 points that helps you. Well, Cardale Jones is probably going to be in that muddle of 20-point guys, and his salary is going to hurt you at 10-8. So you're really looking for a guy who's maybe displayed at least a little bit more ceiling. And I guess maybe it's unfair to assume Cardale Jones can't show that ceiling, but we haven't really seen it yet. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on how to handle that situation? We haven't seen Cardale Jones show a ceiling, but we're almost certain that he's a good quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, that's my kind of guy. You just described exactly. I mean, I make fun of myself on our NBA shows and everything, because it's like the guys I'm targeting are the guys that are shooting horribly over the last week. The guys that are going 2 for 17 from the field every night, because it's number one, their prices are dropping because it's like no one's going to play them if sites don't drop their prices, and they're becoming lower owned, which are both better things if you believe that their actual baseline hasn't changed, right? Like their actual value hasn't changed at all. So if you're a tournament player, and I talked about this with Hunter today specifically, how it's so weird that a lot of times a good play news will break or something, and everyone will go, oh yes, that's the play of the slate. I'll go, oh yes, a guy I can fade at high ownership. It's just a totally different mindset if you're playing tournaments, and especially on a 4-game slate, there's no way to not make those guys put those guys into consideration for you.
You're really making me think about this, Jeff, because there are so many reasons to play Cardale Jones. All those that we just said, probably the best quarterback in the league, has yet to display a ceiling. His ownership's going to be limited. He's playing against the LA defense that fired its defensive coordinator after 1 game. He's playing with what I said was the lock button wide receiver of the slate. So, man, why should?
Yeah, that sounds like my quarterback this week, man. If I were playing one,
yeah, I was really wanting to make this a little bit more complicated, and I think one great thing he has going for him, he's going to be super low. I mean, comparatively, as low owned as guys can be on an 8 quarterback slate, like Jordan Ta'amu went ham last week. Phillip Walker's the guy everybody wants to play. Josh Johnson's probably the upside guy with some semblance of salary savings. Cardale's kind of going to be possibly the forgotten guy among those 4 guys, possibly. So, and Landry Jones, everybody's still aiming to play, the Hal Mummy guy. So, and possibly the best quarterback in the league per the initial league draft. So, yeah, maybe Cardale's the forgotten man. I can play my home team DC Defenders against your scoundrelly LA Wildcats defense, porous defense that it is. And maybe is that the path to profit?
Certainly what is standing out to me in our conversation here tonight as something that's a bit exciting. Let's talk about running backs, though. So you've got a couple guys projected really close together for DC. And then with Elijah Hood, I'm questioning whether he is a viable player, not being that the Wildcats are such big underdogs, that he's been on the injury report and he's not involved in the pass game. So I understand Elijah Hood's price is dropping and everything. It would seem to be potentially another guy like Cardale Jones, where it's just like, can't really give up on him yet. His price is dropping, his ownership is dropping, but that game flow concern does factor in for me.
Yeah, and while we're talking, will you look up the injury report as well? I have some questions about Malachi Dupree for DC. Yeah, as we're looking at which teams can run the ball and which teams can't, LA averages 3.8 yards per carry running the football. That's second worst in the league. And guess who is third worst, but guess who the worst in the league is? That's my DC Defenders. So two of the worst running teams in the league will face off against each other, but LA's been pretty rough against opposing running backs. So if there's an opportunity for the DC guys to explode, possibly this is it, but it's just not the way I want to play this game. I don't want to play the running backs from DC. Haven't seen a whole lot, and we've got a full-blown timeshare there between Donnell Pumphrey and Jarrell Presley. I guess I'm talking out two sides of my mouth because I said that was something I liked about the Tampa Bay backfield, and now I'm saying it's something I don't like about the DC backfield. But I guess the difference there is the production. We've seen Tampa Bay be super productive running the football, and DC not a lot. So in a team that is averaging fewer than 4 yards per carry, I need to see somebody emerging as a workhorse. When we're running for 5 yards a carry like we are in Tampa, I'm a little bit more encouraged that one of those guys is subject for a big play. So, balancing Donnell Pumphrey and Jarrell Presley, those are the two killer peas. Did I just coin something? Killer peas in the DC backfield. I like it. And the killer peas averaging 3.76 yards per carry. So, really killing it. But so I'm not that interested in either of those guys. But if we're going to play one, it's probably Pumphrey. He's actually priced up above Presley. So they're right there together. No big difference, honestly, between the two. Pumphrey probably a tad more apt to catch a football every once in a while.
Yeah. I can't think of anything that I'd imagine you to be more excited about than being able to coin some punny nickname or something. I mean, to me, that would be like, oh man, Justin, his life is made. This is the best day of his life if something like that ever stuck.
Mark it, February 21st, 11 p.m. Eastern. Killer Peas was born right here.
Us and our 3 followers are going to make it just take off, man. No doubt about it. Our 3 viewers right now. Yeah. So yeah, I think that I'm curious, I guess, what your favorite play from this game, aside from Tompkins, is. And you asked about Dupree, right? He was questionable and he was limited in practice with a shoulder injury. So I don't know what that does for you, but what's your favorite play in this game? And let's rule Cardell Jones out as well. Don't give me Jones. Don't give me Tompkins. Who's the next best guy?
I like Adonis Jennings, the deep ball guy for LA, and one more guy for LA there in the pass catching group was Saeed Blacknall. If you're looking to get super cheap and interesting, consider Saeed Blacknall. He was a guy who started for them in week 1 and was out last week, so people have kind of forgotten about him. So he's going to be a guy who at 3,300 grades out really well as a guy I like. So not interested in the running backs. It's all pass catchers for me.
All right. So I don't have much else here. I don't know if there's anything else from this game you want to talk about, but if not, let's just why don't you sum up for the slate, everyone, your main points, like some of your main targets.
Yeah, I think honestly, the main thing to take away is roster construction. You want to be playing this the right way. You don't want to be throwing lineups away. Obviously, especially if your goal is to play smaller tournaments and things like that, where you're not going to have to get super creative. I think your best bet is to continue with the one running back lineup and just shove as many pass catchers in there as possible. And I think attacking a single game is the best way to climb up a leaderboard. And, the odds are that one of these games will emerge as a bit of an outlier. So if you are playing multiple lineups, why don't you give yourself a lot of different ways to get a piece of how that game could unfold. And, if you're MMEing, it gives you a chance to go a little bit deeper down the depth chart and, catch one of these guys who is not going to project out as well, but could obviously, we just think about how football's played and how it's scored and how the production is distributed throughout the offense on a week-to-week basis and embrace that volatility. But we've got good projections. I feel really good about what we've put out there so far. We've been right on the money as far as projecting team flows and volume and pace and really, to a certain extent, opportunity. And we're getting better and better. But the thing is, everybody else is getting better and better as well. So just take advantage of some of this overconfidence bias that's out there and find some key spots to pivot. I think is a good way to approach it.
Yeah, great job with everything so far, Justin. The amount of content you're putting out for free, the job that you're doing with your projection, all the work that you're putting in, it's turned out to be incredible, really valuable, really sharp looking. You look at his charts and everything, he puts everyone else to shame. So yeah, keep up the good work, man. It's been fun to watch it from afar and now be involved in it in a very small way as I just kind of led the discussion here. Appreciate everyone that tuned in and that is watching this later, of course. Well, everyone watched it live, everyone who's going to watch it later. And I'll drop in the link to the XFL page where there is the free content in chat here. You can check that out. Of course, if you're not familiar with us, which I imagine most of the people watching are, we've got all the other sports too, all the other big sports going on. So lots of good stuff. Thank you for doing this, Justin, and inviting me to join you, and good luck.
Yeah, just a few retweets shy of being able to make this a legit interview, but I appreciate you hopping on with me, man.
Yeah, awesome, man. Take it easy.
See you, dude.